Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Where is the Revenue from Virtualized Services, sponsored by ECI. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be captured, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget with a question mark. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take a minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I'd now like to turn the event over to Light Reading CEO and founder, Stephen Saunders. Steve?
Hi, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where our audience is today, and welcome to a very exciting webinar, which we're delighted to be hosting with ECI. Revenue from virtualized services. Well, that's really the big question, isn't it? We might even just say, where's the money, or follow the money. It's literally the key question which CSPs are asking at the moment. In our conversations with CSPs and service providers around the world right now, it's very clear that they understand virtualization and NFV and the value of virtualization at a high level, and they know it's inevitable that they're going to have to deploy it, but they need to understand the business case. Now, I've just come back from visiting ECI in Israel, and I was absolutely blown away by the level of insight that they have into this particular topic. So I'm absolutely delighted that they've agreed to share some of their insights on this critical topic with the industry at large. And joining us from ECI today is Jonathan Homer from ECI, Director for Portfolio Marketing. We don't have Chaim today. He had to drop out at the last moment, but really happy to have you here today, Jonathan. And also from Light Reading's team, we have Ray Lemaitre. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, good afternoon, Steve. Glad to be here, and like you said, a very, very hot topic.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw it over to Jonathan right now. And Jonathan, welcome to the show, and take it away. I'm wondering if Jonathan's still on mute. The famous webinar. There you are. Okay. Well, that's good. It's good that you're here. Anyway, away you go, Jonathan.
So, Steve, you finished the introduction over here?
Yes, I have. Just introduced the
well,
topic at a high level.
I apologize for that. We were on the call, and they disconnected my line over here. I'm Jonathan Homer. I'm responsible for portfolio marketing at ECI Telecom. The original plan was to do this conference along with our CTO, Chaim Porbat, whose name is featured on this introductory slide. Unfortunately, he was called out for a customer meeting. Chaim, and I hope you will have a chance to hear from him in the future, is ECI's biggest evangelist for the benefits and of open programmatic networks and everything that it could bring, and how it's really going to drive fundamental change within telecom networks. And I hope you do have a chance to hear from him at some time in the future. He is out speaking a lot to the industry. So, why are we here today? What are the major challenges, if you like, facing the communication service provider community? And I would maintain that the biggest challenge facing the CSP community is raising top-line revenues. There's really two issues that are being faced. The first is in and around cloud computing. Cloud computing, hosted applications have really exploded all around us. However, by the nature of these centralized cloud computing services, they can be delivered in such a way as what we call over-the-top delivery. So other than perhaps participating in benefiting from some last-mile revenues in terms of bandwidth, the CSPs really haven't been able to participate in the revenues that have come from cloud services to date. I see some changes on the horizon, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation, but that's been the situation until now. On the other hand, the CSPs have also been investing very heavily in network modernization. And they're already starting to see a lot of the benefits from that from a capital expenditure and operational expenditure point of view. However, in terms of raising top-line revenues, that still continues to be a struggle. They're still trying to figure out how to monetize that in terms of a revenue stream. So what I'd like to do today is start discussing with you how to imagine a different path, how to paint a different picture in terms of how you as CSPs can start recognizing and realizing new revenue streams. And really what that comes from is starting to consider how to start transforming your network into a dynamic services platform that brings value to the businesses of your customers, the end users, and of course, as a result, also enhances your revenues. So when we're trying to gain a picture of the end game, try to imagine the limitless vertical applications that your end users can benefit from if you can provide them with a truly dynamic services network. And of course, the kinds of benefits and applications would change segment by segment. So it would be used differently by healthcare, financial, manufacturing, retail, government, education. And I've listed a few of the things here as examples of ways that they could benefit from a dynamic services network. And I'm certainly not going to read through each one of these things, but just taking a look, for instance, at healthcare. One of the main issues with healthcare is, people are living long lives, accumulating extensive medical records, seeing more and more specialists, dealing with issues here and there. And there's always this issue of creating and recreating all the medical records for everyone that they see. If there was ways that this could be centralized and transmitted securely in such a way, this would benefit everyone, both the medical providers as well as the people that are actually receiving the health care, of course. Another thing from a healthcare point of view is that we're going more and more towards intelligent monitoring devices, monitoring your heart, monitoring your blood pressure, monitoring your blood itself. People are wearing these types of things, and just providing some overall platforms for continuous monitoring of these types of medical devices and centralized collection of the information would really benefit the healthcare community. And then, of course, it's probably not so far into the distant future when we start combining robotics and broadband, we can start considering remote operating rooms, whereby you can have skilled surgeons sitting at one end of the country and performing operations on someone at the other end of the country. Right now, I think it's just really a problem of bandwidth. But having this bandwidth readily available and secure and making sure that it doesn't drop in the middle of the call is something that would need to take place. And of course, you can imagine, again, from a dynamic services point of view, how this can apply to many other vertical applications. Another one I particularly like, and we'll talk a little bit about this more at the end of the discussion, is what I call smart city for traffic control. Just imagine every single intersection equipped with monitors and controllers that you could really continuously monitor the flow of traffic and continuously adjust the traffic lights to really maximize the flow of traffic going through your intersections. I know I face that every day where I'm sitting at red lights. There's no traffic in the other direction, and I'm saying, why the hell can't the lights change? That would really benefit me. So clearly what we need to do to transform the network to a dynamic services platform is to bridge the gap from where we are today with our networks to a network that has the desired characteristics. What we really fundamentally need to do, our goal, is to be able to turn up services in a much more rapid and in a much more customized manner from what we can do today. We're constrained by a network, again, that's been based on technologies and operations technologies that's 20 to 50 years old, depending. And we need to be able to modernize it, that it's much more in sync with the kind of experience that people are facing when they're hosting applications and services, say, in the cloud itself. As the major path towards getting there, CSPs today are investing in really two major complementary technologies: NFV, Network Function Virtualization, and SDN, Software-Defined Networking. What NFV is doing is addressing the virtualization function. What it's doing is enabling delivery of network functionality through software. Fortunately, what's happening is that the computing technology is getting to the point right now where it's powerful enough that I can start to implement in software functionality that in the past needed dedicated hardware. And because of this, we can now deliver this kind of functionality through software. In essence, that's what NFV is providing. It started its life in the data center, and we'll start talking a little bit about how we can start bringing this functionality now into the transport network. What SDN is doing is providing the overarching programmability and control across the network, across both dedicated functionality, and there'll be certain functionality that's not going to get virtualized anytime soon, like photonic switches, as well as the kind of virtualized resources that we're going to be talking about, such as configurable customer premises equipment, dynamic VPNs, security functions, etc. By putting these together, we're starting to see the infrastructure coming into place that can start delivering a dynamic services network. Of course, other changes need to take place as well, for instance, at the operation support systems level, because if you're going to have these dynamic services, you also need to be able to manage for them and bill for them. And that's going to require some changes at that level too. So as a next step, how do we start imagining a dynamic services platform from a customer point of view? So this is just showing a sort of a very simple screen where the customer will interact through a portal and order the services that they want. I believe the kind of experience that we're trying to target is similar to the kind of experience that customers have today when they, for instance, will go on to something like Amazon services or Microsoft services in terms of hosted applications, and be able to sort of pick and choose resources, sometimes where these things are located, and who can access them, and turn these things up and have them available instantaneously. I don't know if we're going to achieve that immediately in the network, but that is sort of what we should be aiming for in terms of a customer interface paradigm. But once you've gotten by the initial screen, what actually is occurring? So we see in the upper left, the customer orders the new service, and I'm imagining this will take place through some type of customer portal. The customer portal then speaks to the network and says, okay, this is what customer X desires in terms of a number of services mix and for how long that services needs to be sustained. And then the SDN and NFV control and orchestration take place, along with of course, some operation support systems functionality. And what occurs is what I say is where the magic occurs. And there's a lot of complexity and detail that take place, both in terms of these architectural elements of software-defined networking and network function virtualization that need to take place. However, the major elements for this are all starting to occur now. What we truly believe at ECI is that to make this effective, that we truly need to evolve to an open, multi-vendor infrastructure. So not looking at these just as another means of configuration control and saying, okay, now we have a different kind of protocol to use that I'll extend to my equipment alone. We really need to move to an environment that supports both truly open interfaces in terms of the kinds of control functions that can be executed on top of different types of network equipment, and move to open source types of operating systems that people are all working in terms of common types of configurations and supports the common kinds of southbound and northbound interfaces, particularly to the higher level applications and to the operations support systems. By going towards this truly open environment of interfaces and open source and open ecosystems, we can actually start moving towards an environment where there's true programmability. And it also enables the creation of best of breed that people will naturally gravitate towards rather than being locked into a specific kind of solution by one particular vendor. And we're very, very strong proponents and supporters of this open interface. So once the magic has occurred, the network is reconfigured, and the customer starts using the service. So this is, at a very high level, the kind of chain of events that needs to occur. So let's go one level deeper right now and start to understand what are some of the characteristics of these SDN and FV networks in terms of making it a dynamic services platform. And I think the best place to start is with a good understanding of really where we are today. So today, when we talk about services, we're talking about services that are rigidly defined. And the reason that they're rigidly defined is because they're closely tied to the equipment that's delivering them. So if you have a VPN, it's tied to the type of termination that you would have, for instance, in terms of your customer premises equipment. If you have a bandwidth service, it's tied to the interface card that's sitting within the network or sitting, again, at your termination point within your premises. It's very much tied to the equipment, and as a result, it's rigidly defined. On top of that, the various elements around the service itself are sort of based on operations technology that's quite a bit old. So for instance, when you need to order something, you either need to speak to a business representative, or you need to, or today you're beginning to interact through some kind of portals, but it's through a very fixed type of template with limited number of options. You're ordering one, you're ordering one service at a time. Depending on the service, it could take days to weeks to be implemented. Many times, particularly for more complex services, you're tied into a contract. And as I mentioned before, when it comes to coupling this with value of cloud services, today I can truly say there's no additional value that the service can provide because it's all the cloud value is all being delivered over the top. So what is the kind of era, what is the kind of characteristics that we're talking about once we start truly moving into an SDN NFV era? So for one, we're talking about services being more dynamic, and I'll devote some of the next slides to what I mean by that. But again, because we're moving to a kind of NFV environment whereby the functionality is being delivered through software, we have much greater inherent flexibility in terms of defining the specific services. So there might be variants in what we see today, but again, we can do something which is much more customized. With evolution of the support functionality, I see us moving towards a custom portal, perhaps dedicated to different industry types, and in the case of large customers, perhaps even dedicated to the customers themselves. You'll be able to mix and match services. So for instance, you can match your VPNs with your bandwidth. You'll be able to get services turned up very, very quickly in minutes. And we can start introducing the concept of what I call short-lived. Rather than thinking about contracts and turning up a service and then if you don't want it anymore having to cancel it, you can think about having a service which may only exist for a few days or even a few hours. For instance, if you want to broadcast some event and you just need bandwidth for 3 or 4 hours. And then as a topic which I'll get towards at the end of the presentation, there's some unique opportunities that are arising on the cloud services side. As we're moving towards new types of cloud services, such as machine-to-machine communications and the Internet of Things, which will require different kinds of values and characteristics from the network, and as a result, may offer opportunities for closer coupling with the network, and as a result, more revenue opportunities for communication service providers. So what type of dynamic services are we talking about? I put a fair bit of thought into this, of course, through discussions with our customers as well. And really, I see a large majority of the business value that's being offered can sort of be put into these four buckets over here of what I call a core set of dynamic services. So there's definable CPE, managed security, dynamic VPNs, and dynamic bandwidth. Now, I'm stating these more from the perspective of the customers. When we talk about the perspective of the network engineering, I think we might give these things different types of terms, and we already have some ideas of how they'll be implemented. For instance, the definable CPE would be something that there's a fair bit of work in the industry already in terms of virtual network functionality for virtual CPE. Same thing when it comes to managed security, we tend to talk about managed firewalls, but it could be much more than that. With VPNs, we already have a number of defined services, and for dynamic bandwidth, that's actually a bit more on the SDN side in terms of being able to change connectivity across the network, but again, would work hand in hand with the terminal equipment. So these are from a customer point of view, but they map very strongly into the network delivery paradigms. So definable CPE or virtual CPE. So all advanced services need some kind of termination point between the communication service provider network and between the customer's own network or the equipment that uses that network. And this is true for both businesses and residential services. As we move away from predefined hardware that's associated and often ordered with the services, we can go to a more general purpose configurable platforms. In the case of businesses, this kind of CPE can support things such as routers, layer 2 and layer 3 VPNs, firewalls, network address translation, and I can provide you a shopping list that goes down another 10 items or so. On the residential side, today I think we're all familiar with smart set-top box functionality. This tends to almost always be tied closely to what the service provider has. And hopefully that we can move in the future to something which is decoupled from the service provider. And this way it gives the end user more flexibility in terms of that smart set-top box. For instance, on top of that, you could be able to, for instance, for television and video, maybe implement some kind of recording on demand. In terms of access to content itself, perhaps start instituting security measures such as parental control. I think when it comes to virtual or definable CPE, that's probably the easiest for us to imagine because we're already used to actual boxes sitting on premises. And just think about these boxes now just becoming general purpose boxes that can be configured remotely with the latest and greatest type of software that's required to support the services, something which is continuously upgradable. In terms of managed security, I'm asking you to start thinking beyond sort of standard firewalls and start thinking about a suite of security applications that can be provided. This is actually a very strong part of what we're offering at ECI through our own product, which I'll just mention at the end, called LightSec. But what it does do is you can start thinking about a holistic suite of security applications extending from layer 1 all the way through layer 7. So it can encompass things such as layer 1 to layer 3 encryption, denial of service protection, secured gateways, authentication. and then higher value type of functionality, which can take place based on deep packet inspection and do analysis which takes place over weeks and months of time, looking for patterns and changes. Today, when people are really breaking into networks and providing all sorts of bad things in terms of crashing the networks or gaining access into information, it's usually based on attacks that take place over many weeks and months. And some of the products that we're looking at, like network anomaly detection and big data analytics, look at these type of trends. On top of that, we're looking at situations where security can be implemented as needed. For instance, for instant e-commerce firewalls, perhaps you're bringing on a new supplier or a temporary supplier. You can do quick audits in terms of your network, perhaps not on a continuous basis, but just order this up once a month. Or for instance, you haven't bought into a denial of service application and all of a sudden your network's under attack. Well, it's something which you can start turning up and implementing, say, within a matter of minutes. And then, like for set-top boxes, the parental controls that I mentioned before. Dynamic VPNs. Well, VPNs, we all understand, are about carving out private internets from larger networks, but without the need for dedicated facilities. You can do this on an internet basis, or more along the lines of supporting business requirements, we can provide and implement more complex VPNs for enhanced performance, for example, using Layer 2 or Layer 3 MPLS-based VPNs. If this is a dynamic VPN, we can start imagining a variety of applications that can be implemented quickly to accommodate temporary user groups or special user groups. For instance, let's say you're bringing your company to a hotel for a conference. There's a public Wi-Fi over there, but what you can now do is start extending your private VPNs and all the bells and whistles that that provides to your users over that public infrastructure. It perhaps could extend towards gaming applications where you have tens of thousands of users and provide them some specialized kind of access to Gaming Central using VPNs as opposed to just generalized internet access. So again, there's a variety of applications that can start to take place once you start making these capabilities fast and dynamic and flexible. Dynamic bandwidth, I think we in this community all understand this fairly well, is bandwidth on demand, but it's making a reality out of this service. We start to really understand the benefits of bandwidth today when we talk about business continuity, the need for data mirroring and data backup, or if a site goes down, how to recover that. But if we truly had bandwidth that was instantaneous and that can be used, we can easily imagine all sorts of applications. I had already mentioned things like remote operating rooms. But think if you were a retailer, how you can quickly increase your server bandwidth, perhaps based on some specials that you're running, to maintain the kind of quality of experience for your customers. Or if you're running some special events in your corporation, that you can actually broadcast or receive feeds to broadcast for broadband communication. So these are the kinds of dynamic services that we're talking about. But how does this now start to impact your revenues? So we see on this slide over here what I call the pre-SDN NFV era and the SDN NFV era. And what we can imagine is that based on a dynamic services network, we'll start to see both new network services as well as greater service agility in terms of customizing and rapid turn-up of services. And I'll be honest, I have a little bit of a tough time knowing where one ends and one begins. Because what I've been talking about primarily isn't anything new. I'm not quite sure, what is sort of new about some of these services. But what we are fundamentally being able to do is take this basic functionality and deliver it in a much more effective way in terms of rapid turn-up, customization, and chaining, and really putting together something which customers can now use in a dynamic fashion. So what I'm expecting is, and really I think it's important that we all get on the same page in the industry, is how we will start to generate more revenues. And I maintain it's not from things that are essentially new. I think maybe at some stage we cross over when we make things different enough that they're new, by doing things in a sort of a more rapid way. And what's going to happen is customers are going to start to use these services much more effectively, driving more use, and then we'll get what we call is like a virtuous cycle in terms of it's enhancing their business and they'll consume more services. And I really see this as the benefits of achieving a well-implemented SDN NFV network. At this stage, I'm going to hand briefly back to Light Reading to conduct a survey before I continue with the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. This is Ray here at Light Reading. So we're going to come now to our first audience poll of the day. And this poll is focused on the topic that Jonathan has just been talking about. And the question is, which virtualized services offer the most immediate revenue potential for communication service providers? So which of these virtualized services offer the most immediate revenue potential? So the selection, the choice is between managed security, dynamic VPNs, dynamic bandwidth, dynamic collaboration, customer entertainment applications, or other. So just go through those selections again. You should be able to see them on the interface in front of you. Managed security, dynamic VPNs, dynamic bandwidth, collaboration, consumer entertainment applications, or other. If you do select other, then please maybe suggest what the other might be using the Q&A tool that you also have on your interface. And also, please use that Q&A tool to pose any questions to Jonathan from ECI, or any general questions as well that Steve and I from Light Reading might feel that we can jump in and answer as well. And we'll get to those at the question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. So I'll just give a couple more seconds for people to submit. But also an important, an interesting point Jonathan was making there, that a lot of the services we're talking about here aren't necessarily new, but as we get to the stage where VNFs are being deployed and SDN and NFV are being brought together in networks, what we're finding from early feedback from service providers who are running real customer trials is that through customers using the new services and new capabilities, that's when the opportunities to discover and identify new service options comes about. So I think, in 2016, we'll be able to talk about a lot more options. Okay, so let's have a look and see how people have voted today. So the question was, which virtualized services offer the most immediate revenue potential for CSPs? And it's pretty tight, actually, near the top. So the leader in terms of the votes from you, the audience, is 28.6% for dynamic bandwidth, followed very closely by 26.5% for managed security and 22.4% for dynamic VPNs. Consumer entertainment applications got 16.3% of the votes, and quite some way back, dynamic collaboration on just 4.1%, and just 2% for other options. So just to look at that, some of the very familiar applications that have been discussed in terms of virtualized services environment, dynamic bandwidth just got the most votes with 28.6%, followed by managed security, and then dynamic VPNs. Jonathan, any surprises here in these results from the audience?
No, I think it's still early days for these kinds of services, so it would be sort of more interesting to compare this question perhaps in a year from now. But I think we're sort of all getting a feel for where the value is, so no surprises.
Okay, excellent. All right, we've got another audience poll question coming up shortly, but in the meantime, Jonathan, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you.
Oh.
So we all see, oops, here we go. Thank you very much. So after this poll question, I'm going to switch gears and revisit the original, or one of the original subjects that I mentioned was the challenge of over-the-top delivery and the fact that communication service providers were not able to participate in those revenues. The technical reason why OTT works is because if you take a look at OTT services, what I call centralized cloud computing services here on the lower left, hosted applications, storage, video, technically they do not have any real latency requirements. A couple of 100 milliseconds works. And the frequency of transactions, because it's mainly man-to-machine, is fairly low, fairly small. So the network can easily act as a transparent pipe. However, there is a new variety or a new breed of cloud services emerging, what is being called edge cloud computing. And this is being driven a lot more by intelligent machines. I put a lot of examples here in the cloud. Some of them are the underlying infrastructure, some of them are the verticals. But I'd really like to draw your attention to M2M or machine-to-machine, where intelligent machines are talking with each other. For instance, in the case of traffic lights, or the Internet of Things, which maybe is the sort of umbrella for a number of these types of machine-to-machine communications. Another one I like is augmented reality, or AR, if you're trying to figure out what that acronym is, whereby people could be walking down the street, and it's not quite the same as Google Glass, but it's whereby people are sort of carrying out regular interactions, but are getting additional feeds in terms of the reality around them, as well as their ability to use things to control this reality. These kinds of edge cloud computing applications require much lower latency. They're much more sensitive to latency. And because they're machine to machine, what happens is that there's much more frequent interactions. So before we understand what that means from a network point of view, let me just sort of emphasize this in an example in terms of comparing cloud or centralized cloud versus edge cloud computing networking. So in a centralized cloud computing networking, you can be located in New York, interacting with a hosted application, say in Seattle, 4,000 kilometers away. There could be multiple routers in between. And if you take a look practically at the round-trip delay, probably in the order of 100 milliseconds, if not more. And this is very, very acceptable for centralized cloud applications, which can be delivered over the top. But if we're taking a look at something which is edge cloud computing, and you can start to imagine many of these kinds of applications in a more intelligent, networked world, we're talking about interactions which need to take place over tens of kilometers or over one or two router hops. And then what happens is you can start bringing your round-trip delay down to less than 10 milliseconds, maybe even to the single millisecond range. Now, this kind of infrastructure, if you like, is overkill for over-the-top type of applications, but it's needed for the edge cloud computing world. So what does this mean from a network point of view and the opportunities for network service providers? So what does this have to do with SDN and NFV? So NFV, as we discussed before, is key for delivering virtualized network services. In the diagram here, we call this TNFV, or transport NFV, because the functionality resides in the network rather than in the data center or in customer premises. It's essentially the same kind of vehicle, but there are certain things that you really need to do to make it reside in the network. You want to make it carrier grade. You might want to introduce some kind of hardware accelerators to deal with network protocols such as MPLS. But it's essentially the same kind of functionality, but optimized for the network. What's interesting, though, is that the platforms that are implementing NFV are going to be very similar to the kinds of platforms that are implementing edge cloud computing. So if you take a look at the diagram, you have the big data center on the right. But underneath the sort of two TNFVs, you see little clouds. What they represent is what is called in the industry hyperconverged platforms. What you're putting on those platforms is a combination of computing, storage, and networking. And you know what? That's exactly what you're going to be using to implement NFV functionality. On top of that, they're distributed throughout the network, so they're sitting very close to the network. And as what we see now is an opportunity for some kind of marriage between the edge cloud computing world and between the communication service provider packet optical transport world. I cannot say that I can identify right now all the terms of this marriage. Certainly they have very common platforms. Maybe it can be even providing at a very basic level some kind of platform or infrastructure as a service for these edge cloud computing. On top of that, through closer marriages with these services themselves that are being used, there's an opportunity to enhance the quality of experience of these services. And even, again, if there's close coupling between the edge cloud computing services and the communication services, there's opportunities for applying policy management. For instance, for implementing on the fly certain security measures, implementing on the fly additional bandwidth as needed. But because they require this distributed architecture, there'll be much, and the sort of higher or the lower latency, because the higher requirements for latency and more frequent transactions, there is an opportunity for closer interaction with the network that just wasn't possible with over-the-top delivery of the centralized cloud's computing. So when we re-look at the revenue impact of SDN, and here particularly NFV, what I'm suggesting is that the largest upside may in fact take place based on this marriage with edge cloud computing services. The story is very much yet to be written. I'm not saying that should be sort of the part of the core story in terms of putting out an SDN NFV infrastructure, but what I am saying is that it certainly opens up some very, very interesting opportunities in terms of the parallel developments that are taking place within the edge cloud computing world. And this is something that I'm encouraging communication service providers to start taking a closer look at how they can start leveraging this type of distributed NFV architecture with NFV residing in the network. And this is a good opportunity, before I get into my closing slides, to hand back to our second poll question.
Excellent, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Very interesting idea and proposition there. So like you said, this brings us to our second audience poll question. And that question is a distributed cloud architecture in your near-term plan, so within the next 3 years? So is a distributed cloud architecture in your near-term plans? So you can see the options. Yes, this will deliver efficiencies and enhance service opportunities. Possibly, this is still being contemplated. More likely in the longer term. And the final option, no, our plan is to stick with a centralized cloud architecture. So please take a look at the options and please vote, and we'll see how you, the audience, are voting in just a couple of seconds. And also, just to remind you that using the Q&A tool on your interface, you can pose questions for the Q&A session that we're going to be coming up to shortly. Obviously, lots of very interesting topics that you can put questions in about the different architectures or the different potential virtualized services that Jonathan's talked about today. So please do use that tool and send in some questions that we can address in the coming moments. Okay, a couple more seconds to give you a chance to vote, and then we'll move ahead and take a look at the responses. Okay, let's have a look at how people have voted. So the question was, is a distributed cloud architecture in your near-term plan, so within the next 3 years? So we have 40% of today's respondents saying that yes, the distributed cloud architecture is in the near-term plans, and this will deliver efficiencies and enhanced service opportunities. Another 30% are saying possibly this is still being contemplated, the distributed cloud architecture is still being contemplated, but it's a possibility in the near term. 20% are saying that it's more likely in the longer term, and just 10% are saying that the plan is to stick with a centralized cloud architecture.
That's extraordinary, isn't
Jonathan,
it, Ray?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, Steve, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm just very, very impressed by that result. Having spent the last month talking to service providers, I suspected that there would be more interest in the cloud architecture, distributed cloud architecture, than we had originally thought this year. But to see that actually, 40% are planning it, and actually 70%, or actually 90% feel like it's almost a inevitability, is an extraordinary result. The future of communications is a cloud, isn't it? I mean, that is absolutely true. Jonathan, are you surprised to see how many positive responses we got to this question?
I'm a little bit surprised because I think it's still early days for this distributed cloud architecture. But it's encouraging that people are looking along these lines. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we might come back and talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes in the Q&A. But in the meantime, Jonathan, I'll just hand back to you to close off your presentation today. So, Jonathan, back to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll just sort of use this last opportunity, since we've sponsored this and had a chance, thankfully, to talk a little bit about our view for realizing revenues from NFV plus SDN, to talk about how we're delivering this at ECI. So what you have in front of you is our planetary model, which encompasses our products and solutions. At the core of this planetary model are our transport functions. We have two main product lines: the Apollo optical transport line, which, by the way, does support some level of layer 2 services, and our Neptune packet services line, support very, very powerful, supporting layer 2, layer 3 VPNs, but also provides some support for layer 1 optical transport. There's a little bit of overlap, but we find from satisfying customer functionality, it's usually 90% one or the other, depending on where in the networks these are being deployed. But through Apollo and Neptune, ECI is truly positioned to provide end-to-end multi-layer transport solutions for our customers. On top of that, in the inner transport line is a new satellite called Mercury. Mercury is our network function virtualization platform. It can be deployed in a standalone fashion or as an integrated blade today in our Neptune packet services platform, which makes sense because that is where most of the types of services will be terminated that can be implemented through VNFs. As we move outwards from the planets, we talk about the control layer. Today, we are implementing end-to-end control of all ECI products, including our legacy products, through the LightSoft network management system. And in 2016, we're bringing on board real-time control through the SDN Light Control SDN controller. Supplementing that, we're providing a lot of attention in terms of applications that can run on top of this infrastructure. There's already a variety of applications under a banner which we call Light Apps, which is available today, such as Light Insight, which provides network analytics, Light Connect, which provides bandwidth on demand, Light Action, which provides macros for network operation, Light Time, which provides scheduled bandwidth, sort of an internal service provider complement towards Light Connect, which is an end customer service, and Light Care, which provides enhanced maintenance. All these applications are based on open interfaces. They're based on RESTful APIs. They run today on the existing installed base through the LightSoft NMS and are portable to run on top of the Light Control SDN controller, or in fact, anyone else's SDN controller as these become available. We're truly committed towards this open environment. And then finally, on the outer layer, we talk about security. We've been talking with the industry for about a year right now about our LightSec suite of layer 1 through layer 7 security applications. I tend to think of these as virtual network functions, and in fact, they are available to be deployed on top of the Mercury NFV. And as we start to implement more of the VNFs that I've talked about, and we'll be rolling these out in 2016, I expect that this outer layer will also, instead of becoming a security layer, will become a services layer. So we are committed to the vision of being elastic. I think it's well understood that organizations that are adaptive are successful, and ECI regards itself as the elastic networks company, and our mission is to make our customers successful through this elasticity and through the flexibility and openness that we can provide to implement truly open SDN and NFV solutions. And on that, I'll close the formal part of the discussion and say thank you, and we have about another 10 minutes for some discussion.
Jonathan, thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. Really a very, very interesting topic, isn't it? And we've got some great questions from the audience. The first one, which I'd like to really throw your way, which is a very topical question. In fact, Light Reading just did an event on this in London, which was absolutely packed, which is, what's the future of BSS and OSS in a cloud-based environment? You know, if you can cloudify the network, can you cloudify BSS, OSS, or do you move to a different model altogether? What's going to happen there? It's a question which is important for service providers. It's also very important for a lot of the companies who currently sell BSS and OSS solutions as well. What do you think?
So I'm more of a network guy. I actually have worked and started my career in the OSS and BSS part of the house, so I can sort of provide a little bit of insight to this. These are, when you think of BSS and OSS, you know, they are things which can, in fact, be run as hosted applications. If we're moving towards, you know, open environments with open interfaces, there's nothing stopping us from moving towards best-of-breed solutions in the business side and the operations side in terms of the applications that are out there. And certainly, if you take a look at a number of the leading companies that are providing these solutions, you know, we're starting to see some of these applications sort of moving towards the clouds rather than running on, you know, sort of say servers, you know, buried in the back rooms of some of the communication service providers. You're going to start to see the push and pull, of course, because as you get into the business of the communication service providers themselves, other critical business information is sitting there, so they probably have some concerns from an overall security point of view, you know, and how well this is tied, you know, to their specific network. But I think you'll start to see this maybe take place with some of the sort of smaller, more agile communication service providers, and then some functionality here and there with some of the larger ones. So it's not going to be a transition which takes place certainly overnight, Steve. It'll take place at some time. But it's providing the same kinds of benefits to communication service providers that different kinds of hosted applications provide to the operations of any business that are being run, where they need to make some decisions about how much they keep in-house and how much they can start farming out. So again, I believe it's going to be a sort of a gradual transition, probably starting with the smaller companies first and then with piecemeal functionality here and there later.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ray, I was interested in your opinion on this one. It keeps on coming up, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think the you know, the situation and the viewpoints keep you know, shifting quite a lot. I think as various operators go out with trials with real customers, they are starting to, or they encounter the real world challenges of how to actually manage these new environments. You know, I think it's very clear. I mean, we've done 2 events in London around OSS for SDN and NFV, both incredibly informative and exciting. But you could tell the massive difference between the one at towards the end of 2014 and the one we held just a couple of weeks ago in terms of the approaches that the different operators have been taking. talking now about containerization strategies around delivering the OSS capabilities, in containers with the actual applications themselves. So still lots of different views and angles on this, definitely.
Yeah. Next question from our audience for you, Jonathan. Can you talk to the role of open source and standards in the virtualized communications infrastructure? What's ECI's take on the importance of open source, and will there be defined standards for what you're describing here?
As I mentioned at the get-go, this is key to making this work. Without the ability to sort of base the interactions based on standard interfaces, such as open flow, as an example, between the network equipment and between the controllers, and then agreements for actually extending this, not just to routers that we have today, but also extending this to optical equipment for layer 1 control, we think is very, very key. So it's not just the standards, but for how the standards are being used in terms of being able to exercise control over the equipment. In terms of open source, we see sort of two major open source today in terms of SDN controllers, things such as ONOS and Open Daylight. We're following for the time being the ONOS path. We feel this is a little bit better suited towards wide area network controllers. But again, we don't see any need for us to reinvent the wheel in terms of the SDN controller functionality. This is something which can now become a common industry platform, and as a result of that, we can implement any specific extensions or additional applications and algorithms on top of that, where we think we're sort of best in class. For instance, we're working at ECI right now at some very, very sophisticated end-to-end control algorithms in terms of exercising optimal route selection, coupling both layer 1 and the packet layers in terms of end-to-end networking. So it's key. That's about as simple as I could say it. Thank you.
Yeah. And if I could just ask a supplemental question, because certainly when the role of open source OSs come into play, I think the question that very often crops up is, or the point that crops up normally is, so open source is great for speedy and collaborative development, but what do you actually do with the open source code? Who actually makes it, in effect, carrier class or hardens that code? Is that something that you see the role of the vendor community, companies like ECI, to take ONOS, for example, and harden it, if you like, for service provider use, or is that something that you see the service providers doing themselves?
I know certainly we'd have to look at making this hardened to meet the requirements that our customers are expecting from us. I'm not quite as familiar with the role that the service providers themselves are providing in terms of extensions on top of that. I know various service providers are investing extremely heavily in terms of some of these consortiums, but I'm probably not the best person to answer that.
Okay, let's move on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. We're getting some really, really good questions from the audience, and one of them here is, how can service providers best quantify the savings in OpEx and CapEx from virtualizing their networks? Does ECI have any thoughts on that, Jonathan? Have you had to deal with that question from your customers?
Yeah, we've had to deal with the question, and at this stage, the type of savings that we see is more dealing with the fact that you're able to use a standard platform, and you can scale that platform rather, to the types of services that need to be run on top of it. So, you could argue that, and this is one of the discussions, obviously, that we see within the early days, that when you're talking about some dedicated functionality like a router, For instance, someone can keep coming out with a cheaper and cheaper router, particularly if we're talking about edge routers. On the other hand, when you reach a sort of certain critical mass in terms of the functionality that you can provide on top of an NFV by combining that with other stuff, then all of a sudden you get to a crossover point. So it's really more dealing with the models and the kind of vision that the service providers have for deploying this functionality in terms of the push and pull, in terms of the CapEx and OpEx savings with NFV, which is really why it's going to be there. I don't think you're going to see the huge benefits that you might expect, but over time you'll start to see some of those savings. But it's really why what we're trying to do over here is shift the focus of these discussions from saving money to generating money, because that's really much more interesting.
Yeah. We're actually out of time here, which is a shame because we have many more questions, but to our audience members who are posing these fantastic questions, we will respond to them in email. But that's as much time as we have today. Obviously, this is a topic which could be covered in many, many webinars, and I really hope that we get a chance to work with you again on this area, Jonathan, because you've really offered us some fascinating insights. I particularly liked your network diagram showing where the different applications and services will run in the cloud versus the edge. I thought that was a unique piece of information which I hadn't seen presented so clearly before. So, kudos to you and ECI. As I say, when I was out with you in your labs and talking to your executives, I was really blown away by the level of not just excellence, but also excitement around this topic. So, really, really good job today. And thank you, Ray, as ever. Great job. And thank you to our audience, which is absolutely packed with service providers today. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Guys.
Great
we'll
job.
See you for the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye for now. Thanks.